You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com to see the many different shirts and other merchandise we offer. I'm your co-host, Aaron McTee, other co-host. You may have seen him walking out of a great clips with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is Scott Bowie. Hey,
What's
Scott.
going on, Aaron? How are you, bud?
I'm good. Hopefully, your past few weeks, I know have been kind of rough, but hopefully, everything will start looking up for you here soon.
Oh, it will. No, everything's good. It just been under the weather for a little bit and just tired and wore out. But no, everything's good though.
That's good. So our guest today is Lyn St. James, and what a great interview that was.
It really was, and she was very kind to do it, and she had to work us into her schedule. And no, it was a great interview, and it was a real insight into her career. And boy, don't ever let anybody tell you can't do something because you know she had everything working against her. Really, she had no ties to the sport, and she just made her way in the sport because that's where she wanted to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Definitely a great role model. Definitely, a great person for, women that are trying to get into racing to look up to. And ironically, she's actually heavily involved in that. I know she's involved in, a couple different programs to help bring women into motorsports. So definitely a great
Yeah,
initiative there.
I agree with that. I would say though that she's just a great example for anyone who wants to get into motorsports.
Yeah.
No matter your gender, race, whatever. I mean, she just proves, man, that that if you don't let the walls be built, or at least you can knock them down. So, no, it was really good. And I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad we spoke with her.
Yeah, absolutely. So, wanted to thank everyone for liking, subscribing. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere else where podcasts can be found. Like and subscribe there as well. We appreciate all the support.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, our subscription numbers just slowly creep up, and while some people would not even think that those numbers are great, I do. So I thank anybody who's ever watched or subscribed or anything. So thank you to everybody.
So this week in racing, IndyCar still has an off week. NASCAR, where did NASCAR race?
They were at Darlington,
That's
and
right.
and it was a pretty calm race until the end, and then um, Kyle Larson, who had dominated that race, but they weren't good in traffic. So anytime they would lose the lead, although he did pass for lead, but they're late in the race. Anytime he had run in traffic or whatever, he really struggled. But at the end, he went, as he put it, video game mode and tried to win it by just not lifting and running against the fence. And hopefully, Denny was going to turn and diamond off the corner, which he didn't do. So he didn't give Kyle that big opening for the run around the top. But that was a little surprising, to tell you the truth. But that just shows you how bad he wanted it.
And man, Denny Hamlin, what a week that guy has had.
Yeah, you talk about the ups and downs of the sport, man, as far as like the public eye part of it. And then, he had a rough week in the court of public opinion, but he got a win. That's his job. So he's doing his job. He's moving on to the next round of the playoffs. And, that's really the, championship's the only thing he's really missing from his career. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how this all boils down in the end.
Yep, but I think it's safe to say Kyle Larson will definitely be in the picture. There's no doubt there.
Well, it sure looks that way. If he's not, he's going to give you everything he's got, everything that car's got. I mean, that thing was a smoking heap on pit road when it was all said and done. He just literally ran it against the fence. Hopefully, that Denny was going to get away from the fence and he was going to drive by him. So, man, congrats to that guy for just having the cojones to do something like that.
Yep, never disappoints. Was there so Formula One? Almost forgot. George Russell's going to be teammates with Lewis Hamilton next year. Really, no surprise there.
No, I mean that's the worst kept secret in racing for 2 years. I think. I'm really, the one shot he had, what was it, last year? He had a big lead, and then they had a bad pit stop or something. But so good for him. I think it's going to add a lot of competition to that team.
Oh yeah,
and so it's going to be really interesting to see how all that plays out next year.
Sure will. Is there any other racing news we're missing? It wasn't a whole lot.
Not really. I mean, as far as like Indiana open wheel scene, not a lot of racing. My old pal Critter Malone picked up a win in a sprint car down at Hobstadt. Well, congratulations to him. That's one of his favorite tracks, and it's a tough group of competition down there. And then in USAC, Tanner Thorson won the Fireman Nationals up at Angel Park in the midgets. And Brian Tyler won the Silver Crown race over DuQuoin yesterday, which he's one of only 3 guys over the age of 50 to ever win a USAC Silver Crown race. So congrats to him. Tough racetrack. That's a neat place, and I know how much he loves that type of racing. So congratulations to him.
And I think the World 100 is this coming weekend in Eldora.
Yeah, I don't know the format. I'm terrible at the format with that and all that. And I don't know. I know that some people have indicated Larson's going to run that. I don't know if he can or not.
Yeah, I thought he was. That's what I saw. But I mean, we saw what he did with Knoxville and in the Brickyard. So, well, I guess it's not the Brickyard anymore, but at least the Grand Prix. I mean, he was able to pull that off. So, want to put it past him.
No, and I know that's another crown jewel he's trying to put into his trophy case. So, but that's a big one. That's a big one for the late model guys, and that's going to be a hard one to get. I mean, there's probably 50 guys that could win that. So, it'll be a great show, and they'll have a monster crowd like always, and so it'll definitely be a great show, though.
Yep. Well, I think we'll keep this kind of short today, and we'll just go straight into Lyn St. James' interview. Hope everyone enjoys.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good one.
Our guest today was the first woman to get Rookie of the Year honors in the Indianapolis 500 in 1992. She drove in a total of 7 Indy 500s. She has 2 class victories of the 24 Hours of Daytona. We're joined by Lyn St. James. Hey, Lyn, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Hi, Lyn.
Hi.
The last time Scott did this, he always says, hi, Aaron. So this is a first. He's actually getting it right this time.
Yeah, it takes me a while. I have to learn hard way.
Is that a picture behind you, or is that a background thing?
Well, it's my background for my Zoom calls, but it's a picture. It's a picture of a picture hanging on my wall. It's the Ford
gotcha.
Probe. It's a Ford Probe that is a fabulous photograph. That's why I don't even know how I got it. It was one of the official Ford photos I must have said, I love that. But it was the Ford Probe that I raced back in the IMSA GTP days back in 1985, 86.
Right. Cool. So obviously you had a very diverse career. You drove sports cars, you drove Indy cars. When did you first get interested in racing?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the muscle car era in the 60s. And so, I grew up in Ohio in the Midwest. So it was drag racing was really the only thing I saw.
Right.
I do remember going to the fairgrounds and seeing some kind of stuff out there, but that was kind of weird. I didn't really get it at all. It was, and then of course I went to the Indy 500 as a kid, as a spectator. But that was like, I mean, I loved it, but it wasn't like, oh, I said, how am I going to figure this out? But with drag racing, you can figure that out. You can go to a drag strip just about any night of the week during the summertime anyway. And of course, now they're a lot more popular and more prevalent. And just take a streetcar and line it up and get on the line and look at the Christmas trees and go down, and that really is kind of what, like, wow, I thought this is really cool. The guys told me to keep the clutch in, rev it up to about 3,000 RPM, and then, you dump the clutch and take off. And so I won my first drag race, and it was kind of like, that was cool. But when I came home and I told my mom, she was not thinking that was so cool. And so that kind of brought everything to an end. And it wasn't until I moved to Daytona Beach. I moved to South Florida. I didn't move to Daytona, but I moved to South Florida in 1970 and went to the 24 Hours of Daytona and the 12 Hours of Sebring and saw road racing for the first time and thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever really seen. But I also saw there were real people driving race cars. I mean, it wasn't like superhumans that you see at Indy. It was, besides all the cool superhumans like Mario Andretti and Pedro Rodriguez and the ones that were in the front and the prototypes, in the back of the field, there were these Corvettes and Camaros and Porsches. And, I thought, hey, these are like normal folks, And so through the course of, before the internet, when you tried to find things out, it was really hard. But I found out about the Sports Car Club of America, that was who sanctioned those kinds of events. And it was a club and you become a member. And then I went to some races and I worked on a corner and I thought, oh, that's cool. And I, volunteered a couple of other times. And then I found out that you had to go to driver's school to get a competition license. And that's how you had to get on a racetrack. And at the same time, this is in the early 70s, SCCA came out with a new class called Showroom Stock, where you could take a car from the showroom floor and literally, and it had to be a new car. And you put a roll bar in it and a 5-point seatbelt and a 5-pound fire extinguisher. And then you could show it up and race it. And so that's what I did. I bought a Ford Pinto at my local Ford dealer, put a roll bar in it and a 5-point, it's harness. And
Harness, yeah.
Yeah, put a cage in and a harness and then a 5-pound fire extinguisher, which was required by all race cars and not just Pintos, if you remember the stories of the Pinto. But, it was the cheapest car. It was my street car. I drove it back and forth to work and I raced it on weekends in South Florida.
Wow, no, that's cool. Do you think no, so first off, how old were you when this happened? When you first, because
Well,
you
math, but I was 27 when I started racing.
Okay.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So
there was nobody. So in your family, you were really the first kind of car person, I assume.
My mom was actually a car girl. I mean, she was a car person. My mom knew a lot about cars. My mom, when I say she knew about cars, she was very car aware, and so she would tell me she taught me how to drive, and she would tell me the car talks to you. It gives you warnings and signals. She taught me about the smells, the different smells. I mean, she kind of drove the guys at the gas station crazy because she just listened to a car and she related to a car. And so she was the car person in my life and kind of, I guess, made me car aware. And then again, in the 60s, everybody was into cars, at least back then. And so, I don't know, I did what everybody was doing, but I was like, I just was car aware. I think about a car when I'm driving it. I don't just drive it, and of course
Right.
I like to drive fast and that, of course, the drag racing has taught me that, that's pretty cool if you could drive fast, at least going in a straight line. So that sort of got carried away and, we did some street racing and all that. So yeah, other than that, there was nobody. My dad didn't really give a hoot about any of that. And I didn't have any sisters and brothers, so it was just me.
Right. So when you started racing, did you have any initial goals? Like, what was it your goal to originally driving the 500 or 24 Hours Daytona or no?
I mean, just think of this, guys. I'm 27 years old.
Right.
It's 1974. Women were not, it was the 70s. They were burning bras and doing stuff like that, but I wasn't quite into that scene. Just learning how to get a car around a racetrack and how to take an apex and how to find an apex and how to find braking points. And I was like, so basic stuff. And that, you don't just learn that and then figure it out. It was my first goal was just to win a race, and then it was to win the Florida Regional Championship, which I did in the Pinto. And then I went to the runoffs with my husband, and I was married now, and I went to the runoffs, and he had a Corvette, and I saw, man, the best racing at that point I'd ever seen that was also like realistic was at the runoffs. I mean, there was some great racing at the runoffs. It was at Road Atlanta at that time every year. And then I said, I want to win a national championship. That was my really, really serious goal. And that was a very stretch at that point, financially, technically. I had to then get rid of the Pinto, because you couldn't, that year, when they made it a national class, this is maybe more information than you want, but when they made it a national class, they broke it up into ABC, SSA, SSB, and SSC, and the Pinto was the C, and they didn't make that a national class. So I had to have an A, and I wanted an A, and I got a Cosworth Vega. I just did a story for the Vega letter. So I mean, it was very realistic at that time, stretch goals for me. And I never did that. I ended up blowing my engine when I went to the runoffs. I earned the invitation to go to the runoffs, and I went to Road Atlanta in 1978, and blew an engine, didn't have a spare engine, didn't have an engine builder that knew how to fix it. And that's when I figured out I've got to rethink this. You know, I have to either lower my expectations, or I have to figure out how to become a professional race car driver so that I can get sponsors, because you can't get sponsors when there's no spectators. Most of these races in SEC were not spectator events. They're not on television, you know. So I had to rethink it, and I saw an article in Car and Driver magazine that was entitled Ford and Feminism. It's a sidebar story. And it talked about Ford Motor Company wanting to provide equal employment opportunities for women in non-traditional areas. And so I wrote letters to the people that were quoted in that article. And I bugged Ford for 3 years. They sent me a letter and said no thanks. But I kept, every time I'd see a name, I'd used to get National Speed Sport News, and Chris Economacki's column. He would always talk about people, you know, names, and I'd get somebody's name and I'd send them another letter. I mean, I just started hounding Ford to death. And in 1981, they announced that they were going to have a racing division called Special Vehicle Operations. I was invited to come and make a proposal. And the first time I'd ever been in Detroit, well, not Detroit, but the first time I'd been to Dearborn. And I got them as a sponsor in 1981. So.
Man, that's incredible. And just perseverance and just really digging your heels in and say, this is what I want to do.
Yep. No, I mean, once I got the bit in my mouth, and this was it. I mean, this to me was like what life was all about. You know, it was hard work. It was challenging. It was rewarding when you did well, when you got a corner right, you know, there was like nothing like it. And then you have to try to get the next corner right. And so, you know, and then it was trying to figure it out, you know, and I'm a business person. I owned and operated a business with my husband. We were in the we had an auto parts business that we started to justify the cost of racing. We had a consumer electronics manufacturers rep company. So I went to trade shows. I learned the flow of business, you know, and I said, this is nothing. I signed up at college. I took a course in the Introduction to Advertising and Marketing, because I thought I need to know what the business is. I need to know the terminology for that business. I mean, I knew the business we were in, but I mean, I took it seriously, and worked really, really hard, and it paid off.
How did you, so, you know, from the time you started to this point, did you have a mentor? Did you seek out mentors, or was it more just on your own, just figuring it out type of thing?
Yeah. I mean, my husband was very supportive and helped me, but we probably argued most of the time about how to go about it. But he was still, I mean, he was hugely helpful, and you know, particularly in the beginning. And you know, my mentors were people. Whenever I would go to the races, I would watch who's winning. I would look, I mean, I was this observer. I was literally, you know, like a sponge trying to absorb what it was like. Because they didn't have seminars. They had SEMA. And I went out to SEMA because we had this auto parts business. But, you know, there wasn't a performance racing industry show like the PRI show. There wasn't, you know, there wasn't the internet. There wasn't there wasn't anything out there. You had to figure it out on your own. And so I just became a student as well as a competitor. And I asked a lot of questions. A lot of people, I remember Jim Busby, who was a very successful road racer and who I admired so much. And this is after I got Ford as a sponsor and I kept blowing engines and things weren't going well in the beginning. And I'm like, I said, Jim, I'd be at the races. And, the one thing I train a lot of coach a lot of young drivers now. And I say, when you read a publication or you read an internet story, pay attention to the pictures, know what people look like. You could be on the elevator with somebody, at a race, or you could be walking right by them and, you've got to know who they are. And so I would just go up and introduce myself to people, if I needed. And I remember introducing myself to Jim and I said, have you got about 5 or 10 minutes? And he said, well, yeah, what do you want? And I said, would you walk the pit lane with me and give me your observing expertise on every race car and tell me why you can look at that car and tell me what's good about it and what's bad about it. Because I knew there's a way, there had to be a way. And he goes, sure. And he started telling me about the positioning of the seat, where the seat was in the car, where the center of gravity was, what the wheelbase was, where the engine was mounted, how the engine was mounted. He literally made my eyes just go and look at the right important stuff, And that was like taking a whole course in aerodynamics and automotive preparation for a race car. So I would ask anybody a question at any time, and I got to know the tire guys really well. Because
very important.
When you got tires and those tires are good, you got a chance to have some power down. But if you don't have,
you learn quick. You learn quick in that one.
Yep. So I learned. I got to know the Goodyear guys really well, and so you got to put it out there. You just got to go after information and relationships. I've written a lot now in publications. I'm actually in a college course, thing. It's about relationships, and it's how if you tell people what you're going to do, and then you go out and do it, eventually, you hope sooner than later. But the next step is you got to tell them that you did it. The world does not center around any of us.
Right.
And so, and again, even with the internet and all the things now, I don't know what's happening. And I try to stay current. I definitely try to stay current. But if you just want to race, you're only as good as your last race. On Monday, people are all thinking about the next race, So I used to do newsletters and postcards and long before all this was done. So, most of it's common sense.
Well, like you said, I think that was a great analogy talking about today's social media. It's just another tool, but if you don't put the work in, it doesn't help. If we didn't sit down and do these shows, the story still doesn't get told. Just having the podcast doesn't matter if you don't tell the story.
Right.
And I think what you were talking about, your perseverance, and I think that's lost on a lot of people who had a lot of talent. That part of it was lost.
Oh yeah.
Where they don't, it wasn't like, I don't know if they were waiting for people to come to them or if they were just afraid to step out and go, look at what I've done.
Well, sometimes they're shy and I got to know a lot of those very talented drivers. They were my teammates,
right.
And a lot of them beat me, which pissed me off. But you take somebody like a Scott Pruitt, incredibly talented, but also worked his butt off. That guy worked everything. So he was a mentor in a sense because I said, God didn't teach me how to walk on water like he did Scott Pruitt. He just taught me how to paddle real hard. And then I had some other teammates, Tom Gloy, Pete Halsmer, very talented. But they just, some of it was their personality and some of it was, I just talked to Tom not that long ago. And he's like, Lyn, I didn't want to work that hard. You work so hard. You're working still hard today. He said, I didn't want to work that hard. So, and then there's like, they do, some of them did expect because they would win more and they expected that people would come to them. And I said, it doesn't work that way, guys. I would tell them, they'd get mad at me because there'd be a story in the local paper and we'd be at a race. And I said, where were you in the media, in the press? You didn't even go to the press conference before the race. I'd go in a day early and always be on media day. And I would tell people about things about my life. I told them that I took piano lessons and, I just be a human, and so anyway, I saw a lot of talent. That was why I started my driver development program, was because I saw so much talent never get the opportunity, and I said, I want to create a driver development program. Before driver development programs were, everybody says, what's a driver development program? Well, now they're everywhere. But it was like, I want these talented drivers to know that these are the steps, that it's hard work that you're going to work harder off the track than you are on the track. And some of them, Shea Holbrook did a fabulous job at running with the ball, and would take the information, and a few others have done it. A lot of them, were just, I didn't know I'd have to work that hard.
Right. And there's a lot and that goes across the board, like you were saying. I've known a lot of guys who had extreme amount of talent, but they didn't want to put that extra in it separates you from everybody else. And man, that first 90% can be kind of easy. That last 10% is where it's made, in my opinion.
Yeah, and sometimes the most talented ones, it came easy to them. See, I had to work hard right from the very beginning. I mean, I'm not a natural talent. I have some ability, and I have some talent, but I became, I had to work hard from the very beginning. So I think that the ones that, they go out there and they have a natural feel for the car, and they get the right combination, the right car and and they go out and win championships a lot, or they win races a lot, then they're like, okay, I got this. Well, bingo, the next race, or, the next year they start, and at the end of every year, you start the next year at ground zero. I mean, I had Ford Motor Company as a sponsor. Every one of them were 1-year contracts. So. Oh,
I believe that. Yeah, absolutely. And to mention Ford, so you said that you got with Ford, you worked with Ford. Talk a little bit about that relationship and how that brought you further forward.
Well, I mean, it was fabulous because, first of all, because I did love cars, I had them as a sponsor, and I thought, great, and in 1981, that we were having a hard time getting engines because they didn't have any engine blocks. We were having to get engines sometimes, engine blocks from junkyards and stuff like that. So, I mean, the engine, there just they weren't parts. And so Jack Roush finally kind of got that sorted out. It took a couple of years. But because I'm a business person, I was very curious about the business, the automotive business. What does an OEM do? And then I realized that it's the dealers. They needed to pitch the dealers. They needed to convince the dealers why they were into racing. It wasn't just about win on Sunday, sell on Monday. It was like, because they were taking basically money out of what probably would have been dealer advertising, and they were putting it into a race program. And so I learned that, and I started to make appearances in the markets that I would go to. I'd call a dealer, a Ford dealer, and say, hey, I'm going to come, next month I'm coming to town, and I'm going to be racing in the IMSA race at Road Atlanta, and I'll be happy to come in and bring my car. And I started doing some of that on my own, and then Ford liked it, and so I ended up then getting a separate contract from them to make personal appearances. And then I started getting invited to major events happening, in Dearborn at Ford. And I got a tour of the design center. I got, a tour of their corporate headquarters. So I started to become involved with the company, and that was so, so valuable and helpful. So, because I was, all those 1-year contracts, I went through 3 chairmans, and every time you have a new transition of leadership like that, usually if you're an independent contractor, bye-bye.
Right.
And so you start it all over again. But I developed some great relationships there. I learned so much about the car business. The only thing that I remember them was they would say, could you quit talking about the Pinto? Because it's not their... because that was people say, how'd you get started? I mean, that's a question everybody asks. And of course, the Pinto's how I got started. And they're like, could you just not talk about that? I said, sorry, it's the truth. So anyway, it was a great exposure, great relationship. I learned, as I said, a lot about the car business. I did car clinics for women. I did things that I didn't know how to do. I did voiceovers for some of their videos that they were doing, so I got all kinds of, experience in doing things that have been able to help me be better as a professional in the industry, that I probably wouldn't have been able to figure out.
When do you think was like the first kind of like surreal moment, maybe it was race at Daytona, maybe it was race in Le Mans, where you realized that, you actually have a lot of potential being, a professional driver. And, I'm sure, racing Le Mans just got to feel like coming out of a dream or something.
Yeah. Well, I think when the light bulb went off in my head, that I can make this happen. I can do this. Not that I can race, but I mean, I can. I was always ambitious, and then I became relentless. Was when I had that win at Watkins Glen in 1985. So I did not intentionally make a decision that I was not going to let my co-driver in the car. This was a 500-kilometer race. And I had a co-driver who was, he was only there that race. In other words, every race I had a co-driver. And every race they seemed to give me another different co-driver. And Bruce Jenner was my co-driver for a number of those.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, but anyway, but this one was Whitney Gantz, a really good driver, a great kid. So it had nothing to do with Whitney, but I started the race, and it was a beautiful day. And the car was perfect, and I was just in the zone. And I at the moment when I came in for this pit stop for tires and fuel and driver change, I chose not to loosen my seatbelts. I just shook my head no. And I mean, this timing is critical, right? I mean, the pit stops are short. So I finished the race and I won. And I just never, I was in a zone. As I said, I just was in a zone. And I think it was huge because it was a big deal, for one thing. I also, though, learned a huge lesson because the crew, I've watched other victory podiums where the crew's there celebrating, they're cheering, they're drinking champagne or, getting sprayed with champagne. And the car's there and, everybody celebrates. Well, I'm on the podium they had a guy, interestingly enough, who was like the Grand Marshal type person, giving me who was with Serengeti sunglasses. That's a whole other story. But anyway, he's giving me the trophy and there's a few bit of, media celebrating, but the car disappeared and there was not one crew member there. And by the time the Victory Circle podium stuff was done, I figured, they had to put the car back in the garage and they were all back there waiting. And the car was loaded in the trailer and there wasn't anybody there. So that's when I realized, even though I work really hard to be part of a team, I have to take responsibility for the decisions I make. And if you go against the team's going to win. And it was a tough one. But there was still, the light bulb went off me that I drove that well, that long. And I think that just something clicked probably in me, because it was then as when I decided, because remember, on 1-year contracts, I never knew for sure I was going to have a deal next year. And so, and all of us were that way. But I said, before this is over, because I kept thinking this may be as good as it gets. This may be it. I got to drive an Indy car, because we were support races often for the IndyCar series. And I'd watch those cars and they were so cool. And I just wanted to drive one. And I started talking to IndyCar team owners to say, hey, if you're testing someday, or, I just want to drive one. I want to know what it's like to be in a really, really good race car. And so that was, then I won Daytona, 1987, the 24 hours. And I think then I also the ultimate to me was the 24 Hours of Le Mans. After Daytona, there's Le Mans. And so then, and I still had never driven an Indy car, but I still kept talking to IndyCar team owners. But that's when I then talked to one of my sponsors that I had and convinced them to go to Le Mans. They had a product that they wanted to actually release globally. And a friend of mine cut a deal for me with Gordon Spice to run a Spice chassis at Le Mans. And there I thought, this is it. It's never going to get any better than this, you know? And of course I also had these records that I set at Talladega that I had worked on, because then I was thinking, you know, maybe I should go stock car racing, because that's where Ford was starting to spend more money. They pulled the program on this beautiful GTP car, and they were still running the Mustangs GTO, but they were like, I could see that they were getting bigger and bigger in stock cars. And I thought, well, you know, I'm used to racing these big Mustang, you know, GT cars. Maybe I should go stock car racing. And so I set this deal up to take the Thunderbird to Talladega to set these speed records. And Bill Elliott and I got to know each other because we were teammates at Daytona when we won. And so he and his team, his brothers, built the car. Ford commissioned it. And I thought, man, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to drive this stock car, and I'm going to show them that I can drive a stock car around Talladega. Well, we set the records. We went 212.577 and 21 other national records. I hated the car. It was like a truck. You know, I would turn the steering wheel and nothing would happen. I'd have to crank the wheel.
Right.
I mean, the car was awful. And I mean, not that it was Bill's car that was awful. It was just that at that era, you know, and that's when the cars were starting to get actually halfway decent, I guess. But I said, I'm not having any fun. I don't like this. And 3 weeks later, Dick Simon, an IndyCar team owner who I had been talking to for the last like 3 years, I want to drive an IndyCar. I want to drive. He called me after the last race in Miami and said, hey, kid, you want to drive an IndyCar? Be at Memphis tomorrow. I didn't even know there was a racetrack in Memphis. And so I flew to Memphis and I got a chance to turn some laps in the IndyCar. And I made a decision because I got out of the car. I really did good. I really loved it. And when I got out at the end of the day, Dick said, you know, we can do this. He didn't say, you can do this. He said, we can do this. And that's when I made a decision. That's what I got to go. I got to make that happen. So, you know, so in the late 80s, winning Daytona, setting the records at Talladega, going to Le Mans, driving an IndyCar for the first time, set the stage for me to get, you know, the bit in my mouth that I got to go for the whole deal, you know. And so then it took me 4 years and 151 companies before I got a sponsor to say yes for Indy.
I'm not even familiar with a racetrack in Memphis. I'm sorry, what's that?
It's a drag strip. And then so it's a drag strip, and then they have this little return route, you know, that the dragsters use to get back in line. And for some reason that has always been used, not always, but it often is used as an IndyCar test because it's short. And so they can test stuff without putting a lot of miles, you know, on the car. And I mean, it's a long straightaway. I mean, it's a quarter mile, you know, it's the straightaway. And then there's a right-hander and like a little S around. So it's just little squigglies, you know, a little chicane, and then back onto the straightaway again. So it's a pretty straightforward, easy place to test. So it was a very easy track. So, but an IndyCar was a handful. I mean, that was when they had, I don't know, 800 plus or 900 horsepower.
Right. So how many tests did you do before you ran an Indy in the IndyCar?
I did the one in Memphis. Dick organized about 2 years into my sponsorship search. A lot of the people were asking me, have you ever driven an IndyCar, raced IndyCar? I said, I tested one. Have you ever raced in Indy? No, I've never. No. And you want how much money? So I told Dick that, and Dick said, well, let's organize. So he was doing a tire test for Goodyear, and he could organize me to be able to get the laps at Indy. So they kept me at 185 because I obviously had not ever gone through rookie orientation or anything. So then I could say, so I had Memphis, I had one test at Indy. And then after we got the deal done, after I got the sponsorship from JCPenney and told Dick we had it, even though it wasn't enough to do the whole deal, he took me down to Texas World Speedway, the older track in Texas, the old. And he said, I want to teach you how to go flat through the banking because you got to go flat at Indy. And he took me down there in April, like 2 or 3 weeks before we went to Indy for rookie orientation. So I had 3 times I sat in an Indy car before the month of May in 1992. And that was spread out over 4 years.
So your first time ever on an oval was Texas then?
Texas was the first time on an oval, but I mean, it was just turn laps to learn how to get
right, exactly.
So the Indianapolis 500 was my first oval track race and only my second open wheel race. So
wow.
I don't recommend it, but I had no choice.
And we've talked.
Hey, you got to do what you got to do, right?
Right. No, for sure. So we've talked to several drivers, and it's kind of all over the board. Some drivers say that it's more like an oval, but there's a lot of guys that say that you approach the 500 more like a road course because each turn is different. How did you view that? Did you view it more like a road course or?
No, each turn is different. That's right. For sure. But the driving style, is not at all like the driving style you particularly to set up a pass, and so, when you're racing it, it is more like a road course when you race the Indy 500, but when you're driving the Indy 500, meaning going for a qualifying, it's a completely different animal. So because if you have to lift at all, you have to lift right in the middle of the straightaway. So if you have to breathe it, so that you're totally loaded when you go through the corner. And I mean, that's so counterintuitive. I mean, you're on a straightaway. You don't want to breathe now. You want to breathe when you go, oh shit, I got to turn, So, and then when you're setting up a pass, it's the same thing. You have to set up the pass so early. You don't dive into the corner like you do on a road course. A road course, you set it up, but then you dive down and take the corner. It does not. I learned that real quick. That doesn't work at least not at Indy. Those are long straights, and those are short chutes are really short, and those corners they're tight. So you really have to set it up, and in fact, you'll see most of the successful passes are on the outside.
Right.
Of course, now they have a lot more downforce than we did in the 90s. But anyway, I never saw it that I had to unlearn and then relearn a driving style. I mean, I took endless laps in the pace car during rookie orientation. If we weren't having to be someplace in a meeting, I was in the pace car going around the track just to get the rhythm and the feel of that, loading the car through the corner as opposed to diving into the corner and grabbing it. And Steve Kinser, I got to Steve Kinser was a rookie, and I mean, Steve Kinser's like king, right? I mean, hell, I was a veteran and I was one of the observers. I couldn't believe it because they have the veterans or observers when the rookies are, and then they have these meetings, and I can't believe they put me on a corner and then I'm supposed to give input to Steve Kinser when he was a rookie at Indy, and I told him, I said, Steve, you can't go through the corners like you can, in a dirt race. Like you can't,
right.
You can't pitch it, I mean, I was watching him coming through 4. I was like, how do you tell Steve Kinser how to drive around? I mean, I was like, whoa.
He, he's another, like a lot of those guys that just only kind of got one shot at it. And Steve would have been great, if he'd had a bunch of time to do it and, a bunch of chances. But when you get to Speedway, and it's a month-long deal at that point.
Yeah.
And of course, the stories drivers always talk about, one day you put it in the barn, thing's great. Don't touch it. Don't ever touch it. This thing's a rocket ship. And the next day is the worst race car you ever drove. How did somebody who hadn't had much oval experience, wasn't used to that kind of thing, how did you kind of work through that? Did it take a little bit to work through it, or, you know?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, but Dick, I was lucky. First of all, Dick was a former driver.
Sure.
So Dick had this ability, you know, not everybody that can do something well can teach it, but he had this ability to tell me what I needed to know when I needed to know it. He didn't just download everything on me and then me try to remember, well, what did he say? You know, it was like he had that innate ability to be able to do that. You know, looking at the flags for if, you know, if the car doesn't feel right, or every time you go out, not even whether the car feels right or not, you take your eyeballs and you go up and look at the flags by the museum and see which way they're blowing. Because then you're going to know that you're going to have a crosswind on the short chute, or you're going to have a tailwind or a, you know, headwind going down the straightaways. So, or a crosswind. And then during practice, when there's nobody there, there's on the front straight, there's a lot of crosswind because there's nobody in there, you know, in the fans. And so there's just that air just comes right through there. So, I mean, stuff like that disrupt the car because the cars are so sensitive. So he just had that ability to download to me, particularly that rookie year, everything is in a timely fashion. And then Pete Holzberg, who was one of my teammates and who had done Indy, he stopped in the garage early in the month, and I missed him. And because they said, hey, this, you know, Pete came in and he left you a note, you know, on the bulletin board. And he said, "Dear Lyn, believe your butt, love Pete." And so I learned there that, you know, in road racing, you constantly, you're thinking about the car. What if it's not running right, then you keep running it. You keep going around figuring it out. Maybe it's good in this corner, you know, maybe it's in Indy. If there's the least little thing that is giving you feedback or input that says that this isn't right, you come in. You don't try to compensate for it. You don't drive around it. You come in. And that's why during the month of May, you know, they're in the pits a lot because
Right.
And of course, we didn't get data till later. You know, we didn't have data back in the early 90s. And so that believe your butt was, don't try to drive around problems. You know,
Right.
if there's a problem, come in and fix it.
We're actually going to have Pete on in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I think I talked to him a couple weeks ago, so I have to
All right.
ask him about that.
Ask him. Well, thank him first because it was a huge piece of advice. And the other thing, ask him about his airplanes. That was what, you know, he builds airplanes and flies them.
Yeah, no, we were talking about because he was asking if we had to do it via Zoom or Skype. He's like, I don't have a computer or whatever. Can we do it by phone? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I was like, well, we interviewed Paul Goldsmith, and I mean, he's 95 and he doesn't know how to use a computer or whatever. So we had to do a phone with him, and he was telling me a story about he was developing something with the plane with Paul.
Oh, wow. I mean, Pete is such an interesting guy, and he was building these airplanes. He flies himself to the racetrack. That's what, but he told me that. I said, Pete, why don't you tell the media about that? They'll do a story in these flying magazines about you, you know, right. And Ford will love it, you know, because now they're getting exposure in another audience, you know. And he goes, oh, I don't want to talk about
that. We were talking about trusting your butt. That's the same exact advice that Tice Carlson gave Jimmy Kite. Yeah. Jimmy was on here, and he said Tice told me, because Jimmy had actually crashed. He's like, Jimmy, if it tells you something, you got to listen to it.
Yep. And then you come in and tell them, because the better driver, or the more natural drivers, or I don't know, the drivers like a Jimmy Kite who's got a huge amount of talent. I mean, but we're so used to just. They're so used to driving around issues. Right. Racing days, I'm like, I mean, I'd come in and complain about the car, you know, and tell them why. Because I didn't know how to fix it, but I'd at least tell them, you know, hey, you know, it's doing this, it's doing that. I'm pretty good actually at describing what the car's doing. You know, so anyway, I couldn't drive around.
No. And so
the tendency, though, is to do it. The tendency in your brain is, you know.
Well, if I adjust this here, I can do this here, and that, you know, that's the mindset. Yeah. But like you said, it just doesn't work. Why work that hard at it when you can come in and make a change?
Well, and at those Well, at those speeds, you can't. Oh, you
Right.
can't handle them. I mean, you can't.
Right. So you've been through the month of May. Now we got to qualify. And what was qualifying like for you that month?
Well, that rookie year, I mean, I went out in my first attempt. I was in a Cosworth. I had the car, by the way, actually, if I wanted to pick this up and carry it in, my car that I did rookie orientation and that I attempted my first qualifying attempt is on the wall in my living room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it was a Ford Cosworth, a 91 chassis with the old Cosworth. And we went 219, and I can't remember the 4 laps, but I know they were good. I mean, I remember the pulling out. The biggest change about Indy in qualifying is that you are on the racetrack all by yourself. The rest of the time, you have to be thank God from running the 24 Hours of Daytona and all the endurance races where you're really constantly aware of the cars around you, because there's such speed differentials. So during the month of May, I mean, I was always out there. There were always at least some other cars out there. And as I pulled out of the pits onto the track, I remember saying to myself, this is my racetrack. It's like, you don't have to look in a mirror. You don't have to, this is my racetrack. I remember that. Anyway, qualified 219, we had a great day. And then I think that was on Saturday, maybe on Sunday. I don't remember if this because that's when we had 4 days, qualifying. Mm-hmm. And I just remember Dick saying, Lyn, you did really good, but I'm worried. He said, I think we ended up like 23rd or something. And he goes, 219 is as fast as that car will go. With the Cosworth, the engine we have, this has nothing to do with you. I could put anybody, I could put Raul in that car, and that's as fast as that car is going to go. But I'm worried that it's going to hold, that we're going to get bumped. He said, so here's the deal. I just remember this. I have another car. He had like 4 or 5 cars like he always did. And you ought to have him on this. He's a hoot. He tells stories better than I do. He said, I've got to get, and I forget, it was some French guy. He said, I got to get him in, but as soon as he's in, his backup car is released and I have control of the backup car. But until he's qualified, I don't have control of that backup car. But as soon as he's in, I'll let you have that backup car. But the problem is it's got a Chevy in it. And I know you're under contract to Ford. And even though Ford was not sponsoring me for this, I was still had the personal service contract. And he says, you've worked really hard in your career. I'm not going to let you blow it. I said, Dick, this is the Indy 500. I am not going to be able to take advantage of you giving me that backup car. He said, well, I want you to get approval from Ford Motor Company. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, after the first weekend of qualifying, I didn't go out. And the other, his other cars were running. I finally I tried other avenues. I got a hold of a guy at Ford that I was one of my champions of the company. And after I got turned down by the racing group, and it was the day of the board meeting in May. And they said, his name is David Scott. He was the head of public relations. And they go, hey, David's really busy. And I said, I got to talk to him. So he had a break, evidently. He came, he said, what's up? And I gave it to him. I said, I'm in Indy. I said, the Cosworth won't make it. Dick has got a backup car with a Chevy, but you have to send me something to say it's okay. And at that time it was a fax, because he said, give me a fax number. And it was in the media center. And like within the day, I got a fax from this guy at Ford telling me that it was okay for me. If I had to run a Chevy, then it was okay. And then I had Friday to be able to just take a few laps, but I still couldn't go out until the other guy got qualified. And so I then qualified in a Chevy. And I remember, at the end of qualifying, how they always have the photographers and everybody there. And then you wear all the different hats, the Goodyear hat. And they handed me the bow tie, the Chevy hat. And I hear I got a big Ford patch on my suit. And I just said, I can't put that on my head. So there's no picture with me wearing. I'm holding it, but I'm not wearing the Chevy hat. So it was,
Well, I mean, loyalty means a lot, you know.
I'm sorry?
Loyalty means a lot. I mean,
It does, but you know, there's not a lot of loyalty in our sport.
no, there's not.
But you know, it does mean a lot. Relationships mean a lot, and I, you know, I did the right thing. But to me, that was one of the biggest business challenges that I have ever had. You know, it was that week was a tough week. You know, I
Sure.
was really struggling because that was when the new XB Ford engines were there, but they were only to Haas, to Newman Haas. And that's why I was trying to get one of those engines, or I was trying to get one of those cars, or then I said, I mean, I was ready to bail Dick and say, let me run for Newman Haas. You know, I mean, I'm like, Ford, come on, you know, give me the stuff. And I was told that the decision maker in the racing division said, don't do it because she'll never qualify anyway.
Wow.
So race day, you're in the largest single day sporting event in the world. What is it? So you go out for the, you know, the pace laps. Is it kind of overwhelming at first, or when does it get to the point where you kind of block everything out and it just seems like any other race, or do you get to that point in the 500?
No, you have to, but no. I mean, first of all, Johnny Rutherford was one of the, you know, veterans that had the meetings with the rookies, and before the race, like the day before, it was during, you know, on Saturday, and he goes, well, first of all, just so you know, you're not going to be able to see, because you've always been out there, cars have been spread out. Now they're going to be grouped up, and you're going to have they have like 4 pace laps. So he said, all of those fumes, you know, the methanol fumes will just, and because the place is all contained, because you got all the people and everything in there. So he said, you're not going to be able to breathe. You're not going to be able to see. I'm like, holy cow. And he was true. My eyes were running, you know, I mean, it was. And then, of course, that was the year Roberto Guerrero, who was on the pole, crashed on the pace lap. And I remember coming through turn 2, because he was right as he was exiting 2. And I think I qualified 27th. So, I mean, I was in the second to the last row. And I'm like, holy shit. It's like, I knew I was going to have to pay attention, but when you see that happen,
When you see the pole sitter, exactly.
It's like, Lyn, you better ramp it up. I mean, you know, don't just pay attention. You have got to be on, you know, I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And to be honest, it's a blur, but I think John Paul Jr., who I knew really well, and he was in the race, and we got hooked up together running. And that's when I started to learn how to make a pass. I mean, I was just going around as fast as I could go and staying out of trouble and staying with whomever I was with. I wasn't really ready to start making passes because I knew what I was thinking instinctively, that I had spent 20 or 30 years learning, was not going to work. And I couldn't figure it out. And I watched John Paul Jr. make some passes. And I remember saying, well, this is during the race. I'm saying, well, that's how you do it. So I literally would follow John Paul Jr. You know, he'd set him up, he'd pass him in 1. About 2 or 3 laps later, I'd get by somebody in 1, you know, and I thought, damn, so it wasn't until probably, you know, 2/3 through the race where I started to really be a race car driver. I think in the beginning, I was just, don't do anything wrong, don't crash, you know, stay with whoever you're with, just stay with them.
Well, and, you know, I just realized this, even though we've talked about it a bunch of times, that particular race too had its added issues, you know, with the cold temperatures and that. So that had to be, yeah.
There's like 10 guys in the hospital, I think.
And they had all of these crashes, and I couldn't figure that out, you know. And then I figured it out afterward. I have a feeling, at least I think I figured it out, is that these guys were so used to the tires coming in like that. As soon as you go green, those tires, they were used to having those tires come right in. Our tires in road racing, you got to get through 2 or 3 corners. After you've pulled them down, you know, we don't have those super sticky tires like that they have for those. Because, you know, you change tires every pit stop. We don't change tires every pit stop in road racing. We only, you know,
right.
And of course, my instincts after every yellow and we would go green, I would kind of take it easy through that first corner. And the next thing I know, 2 or 3 laps, there'd be another crash, you know? And so I think that was my lack of knowledge or experience of Indy cars, I think, because it was so cold. work to my advantage. Sometimes what you don't know can help you in a certain, very rarely, but in this case.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. That is absolutely a great point. So you've got through the race. You felt, I mean, you had to feel great when it was over.
I did.
Not only did you, persevere through a very tough day, but you finished well, and then you kind of get the accolades afterwards with the Rookie of the Year and that, and kind of
totally blew me away. I was no way that was going to happen. They had 9 rookies that year.
Right.
There was no way I was getting Rookie of the Year in my mind.
was that moment kind of, when you look back in time now, was that moment kind of one of those benchmark moments in terms of, hey, that it's a validation of all that work and all those phone calls and all that?
No, not at all. Really, it was such a shock, for one thing. It made no sense to me. I mean, seriously, I when I saw who had been rookies before, I mean, I did my homework, and
Sure.
I said, how do they decide who is rookie? Well, they have this fairly large group of men who are veteran media people and experts, officials. I mean, they're not going to pick the woman, for God's sake. I mean, I mean, let's get real here. I mean, I thought that's not the point. My point was I qualified and finished the race and did well.
Right.
But when they announced it, I was totally shocked. And then I looked over at Dick, and I realized, even though he had taken more rookies to Indy than any other team owner, he has a long list of rookies that he's taken. I don't know, it's 12, 15, something like that. He'd never won Rookie of the Year with any of his. And so I said, that's why. That's why I did so well, was because I had a team owner who really, as I said, had that ability to take me through this in a way and I was a sponge and I took it all in. And so to me, that was an honor to him. And that's what I said at the victory banquet. 2 things happened. I mean, I acknowledged that because somebody told me that. I think Diane, his wife, told me that he'd never won Rookie of the Year. And then the other thing that happened that was totally unprepared was at the very end of my speech, I said, and we'll be back. And I remember Dick in the audience looking at me like, what? Because he knew I had a 1-race sponsorship deal. And that's all I had. I mean, everybody expected, check the box, you got to achieve a goal. And let's face it, I'm 45 years old. And I had won a race sponsorship deal that it took me 4 years to get. The likelihood is this ain't ever going to happen again. But those last 10, 20 laps during the race, I was in race mode. Like you said, I was no longer hanging on, trying to figure all this out. I was in race mode. And I'm like, I'm going to get them next time. I mean, it was the absolute standard thing that a driver says to themselves at the checkered flag. I'm getting them next time. God, I want one more lap. It was like, I was so motivated. I wasn't at the end like, oh man, I did it. I wasn't that way. I was like, let's go back out. I mean, I was so on a high of learning and getting better that carried over at the victory banquet. And I said, I can't stop now. And so obviously I didn't. I was in 17,500, 15 car races. I kept getting better. I've always been a late bloomer. I didn't start till I was 20. It's just like, so.
Did you ever think that you, after that first 500, I mean, I think you definitely thought you were going to come back, but did you ever think you'd race in six more 500s?
No. I mean, I knew I'd be back. I mean, it was always the next season. I mean, then I got 6 races, JC Penney 6 races. And, if I have any regrets, and it wouldn't really be a regret maybe, but that I wish I had, not really regret, but I guess disappointment. And Dick and I still talk about this. He said, Lyn, if we could have only had one season together, if you ever could have had one season under your belt, because I was always I'd start at Indy, and then, and so you're already behind the 8 ball, and so he just said, you had so much more potential. And because even though I did 15 races, it was over 9 years. Even though I did 6 Indy 500s, it was over 9 years. I mean, it was always playing catch up ball.
What do you think that, obviously you showed perseverance, you had dedication, you had talent. What do you think that thing was that was holding sponsors back from just going in and saying, yeah, we're going to do this for a year. We're going to do this for 2 years. What do you think really was kind of the backup? Because they were obviously willing to do the 500, which that's the biggest one. But what was preventing them from doing the others, you think?
Well, JCPenney sponsored me the first 2 years, and I mean, God bless them for doing that. Their budget was $2.5 million the second year. I mean, they went from $250,000 the first year, which was not enough. That's why Dick brought in more sponsors. He said, we'll get more sponsors throughout. It was a novelty in the first. Let's face it. I mean, since Janet, there hadn't been one. We got a lot of media. It was JCPenney. I found out not until after, I didn't know at the time, that the chairman of JCPenney was trying to make a statement about promoting women within the company and management. So he was using this as a platform for something. I didn't know that. So there was a lot of stuff going on that I didn't know. And so it wasn't just about selling more product. It wasn't about increasing the business of JCPenney sales. I then turned that in the second year to try to make it more about the sales and growing the business, and they just weren't big enough at that time to have the multi-million-dollar. I mean, we still got $2.5 million the second year, and that only bought 6 races. I mean, the cost of racing is so high, and that's still an issue as to why. So I think I never found the right company that had that kind of budget capability. And to be honest, even though the asset I had, which was being a female, was also a liability, because no woman had ever been that competitive or that good that somebody goes, I'm gonna back her, and I'm gonna put it 1 or 2 seasons. They don't take the logic. Okay, you need 2 seasons. The first year you learn the tracks, and then the second year you should come on, and start winning some races the second year. You have to believe that driver that you're backing is capable of doing that. And a woman had never done that. And even though I showed well enough at Indy, the rookie year, I mean, let's face it, I wasn't contending for the win. I was laps down. I mean, so, being a woman was the liability as to why it didn't happen. And I think every woman still struggles with that. Every woman driver still struggles. I mean, you get the attention, you get the interest, and you get a taste, you get a piece of somebody's support. But to get the full-blown blanket, first of all, the team owners have to absolutely believe you. And I can tell you that there was not one team owner that would have given me the shot that Dick Simon gave me. And even to this day, if I went up to Roger Penske, and I mean, the fact that he supported the program, for Beth Peretta this year was monumental, but it was also because of his Race for Equality and Change initiative that he announced, and that because all of a sudden he now owns the track, he owns the race, he sees that he needs every piece of publicity that he could possibly get, every piece of not just publicity, but every piece of, what I mean? I mean, that was another asset coming into him. But yet he still isn't helping her put a full program together.
Right.
They're so happy. You know what? They're so happy they want to do Indy next year, but that's not building a program. So I still think there's not enough belief that a woman that a woman or a group of women can be equal, if not better. And
it's funny to me. We've seen Danica. And she obviously was probably the most well-funded female racer I know of outside of drag racing.
Yep.
Drag racing for years, obviously, has had a lot of very successful females. And really, the only other woman sitting in this chair at this moment I can think of that is equally, or at least has good backing, has good support, would be Haley Deacon, and what Haley's doing. And then, you had Sarah Fisher, who had good stuff,
She struggled financially to have everything.
right, right. And you've had some women who've had some good rides, but not long-term deals and that sort of thing. It's just it's been a long, slow struggle. It appears like to me. Yeah, right. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
And like I've told Aaron, I've said that what's interesting about auto racing is like in the quarter midgets, like stuff I'm more familiar with. And it's probably, I would assume, the same way in the go-karts. When kids are young, the females are actually oftentimes, equal or better. A lot of them. I mean, there's been a lot of great young female drivers. And then something happens when you kind of 14, 15, 16, 17, and you go on up, and then all of a sudden you see this giant gap. And more of the men or boys, where you want to call them, go on, and the females kind of, for whatever reason, I don't know what that reason is, but they kind of top out. Or
I know, I know, because I've worked with a lot of them, and I can't figure it out. I mean, I have some theories, but I don't know for sure. I mean, if you look, I'm involved with the Women's Sports Foundations. I have access to a lot of information and studies that they do for other women athletes. And so it's not uncommon to what happens to, young female athletes when they're in the lower age levels. They're just playing and having a ball and doing really well and all hungry and excited. And when you start going through puberty, bodies change, minds change, hormones change. They start worrying about things, thinking different things. And so I have to assume that that's part of it, because it's common in other sports where, if they aren't excelling, or if they get interested in boys, but if you're a young, let's say a soccer player, and you're playing soccer with all the girls, right? Because it's not a mixed deal now.
Right.
And sometimes when they're young, they are mixed. I mean, they're playing tag ball or whatever, and it's boys and girls playing together, but now they're playing with all the girls. Well, then sometimes they're worried that the guys aren't going to think they're hot, or they're, but when they're all the girls, at least then there's a acceptance by numbers or whatever, you're kind of cool, a star soccer player or whatever. When you're now in a mixed form of racing, as far as gender goes, they start worrying what the boys are going to think, or, so I don't know if that's into play. And then as they get older, the ones that really get me the most are the ones that stick through that. They're now 18 and they've really still won go-kart championships, Formula 1600 champion. I mean, they're like, and then they give up. And I wonder, whoa. And part of it is and this is something that I'm becoming more aware of recently, is that every successful female race car driver, everybody that interviews them, every story somehow or other includes how hard it is, how they can't get a fair deal, how they can't get a full season. It's all about what they can't get. And I've had these Taylor Ferns,
sure,
who have said,
Sarah McCune, Tyler Ferns. I mean, there's many others. Stephanie Mockler, I know. I don't know if she went through your program, but
yes, she did. So, but they're like, if I have to work this hard and I still am not going to have it, if she can't succeed, if Aaron Crocker or, if the drivers that are already there are complaining because they don't have a fair shot, or they don't have this, or they don't have what they don't have, why do I want to devote my life anymore to something I don't have any chance of succeeding? Because sometimes they think I'm maybe not as good as she is, but yet, I want to be, and I've got to work hard at it. So I think, sometimes I think girls are smarter than guys at that age. And I hate to be, I mean, I shouldn't probably say this, but I wonder, this is more of a question, that the girls look around and say, well, there's other things I can do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where the guys, many of them, they don't know how to do anything else.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
Well, and I think you had it.
I got to finish. And not only that, it attracts chicks. So, I mean, what they're doing is actually fulfilling some, where
Right.
like,
Exactly.
you have a chance to succeed and the guys hate me because I'm beating them. I mean, it's like,
right. I think those are all great points. And it's just really interesting to see. I mean, we've come so far in the sport, and I've seen a lot of great female race car drivers. People I would say, man, they've got some talent, and they just kind of go in and like Stephanie Mockler told me one time that she didn't want that lifestyle. Like she didn't want the notoriety.
Yeah. I had a gal in Renee Dupree, who's still with me as far as she's volunteered for all my driver development programs. She told me the same exact thing. She said, I want to be able to go out to dinner and not have people interrupt me. And I don't want to be famous,
Yeah. And that's what Stephanie kind of alluded to me too.
Yeah. So they have a perception of what that life is. I mean, she mentioned Bill Elliott. I said, Bill Elliott could go to dinner and not be bombarded by. I mean, it's like, get over it. You got to be kidding me. But we build up these images in our head, how hard it's going to be, or how the demands of our life are going to be, and.
I'm only going to mention this just because she talked about it in a recent YouTube video, and this is something that concerned me when actually I saw her in the pits at Iowa doing an autograph signing, and I was out there to see Jagger Jones run an ARCA race, and Haley obviously was competing against him, and Haley was running that race. And it is very strange how some men will kind of approach her in that. And she mentioned recently that she's had a couple different stalkers come to her house, and I can see where that is terrifying for anyone. Yep. And it does happen to, it does happen to men. It happened to David Letterman, I believe, or one of those people like, famous people.
I had a stalker at Indy. Yeah.
I mean, really, see, wow.
A number of years, actually. The guy that he was institutionalized, and then his mother calls me. I mean, really, it was scary. It was really scary. But I mean, there's the other flip side, though, where what worries me with some of the female drivers is they're doing it. One of their motivations is to be. They're used to getting, a lot of publicity when they were coming up through the ranks and all that. And then if that's a driving force, then that's also not a good thing, but
right.
The safety thing, I just had a conversation earlier today, actually, with not a driver, but somebody else, another woman in racing. And, the safety factor, and that's why I talk a lot in my driver development program about, particularly now with social media, and there's too much information available, and you don't let out your cell numbers, and you have to build up, safety nets in between, and that's why, to be honest, if you pursue it professionally, you will have those resources, as opposed to if you just kind of keep doing it on a lower level,
Right.
It's not easy.
No, it's not. Yeah, yeah, and like you said, I mean, so, yeah, I mean, I just think that would be very terrifying as a female. But so at what point, so you run 7,500s and you've done a handful of races, and did at any point then you start thinking, boy, this is, I probably need to start exiting the driving side? And is that when you started more looking at more of the mentoringship of these other drivers, or you were doing that long before that?
Well, I started the driver development program in 1994. So
okay.
So I continued doing that and racing. And then I actually when the IRL happened, I started Lyn St. James Racing, and I was my goal was to race to the 500, get a really solid, good win, or really good 500 finish, and then set myself up as a team owner bring other women into it, you know, or other drivers, and then hopefully it'll be looking always for the best female out there. I failed as a team owner for lots of different reasons. And then I got bumped twice. And that's when I just said, I cannot leave. I know I was getting close to this time. I mean, I was in my 50s now, right? I mean, so I'm like,
Right.
I can't do this forever. I know it. So I can't leave as getting bumped. And so with Dick, I was able to put a deal together in 2000 and, you know, qualify, and unfortunately crashed with Sarah. And to be honest, I knew then, I mean, before the crash, but I mean, I knew then that I was out of my element. I was out of my element. You know, I just said, no, this, you're done. So, and of course, by then, I didn't have the wherewithal to start thinking about owning a team or I mean, things that were so volatile with the IRL and the kart thing and all of that, I just stepped away. Except I continued to do my driver development program for, you know, and I created you know, so I stayed in the whole mentoring, training, whatever you want to call it, you know, role for women in racing.
So you were earlier, you were talking about, you know, it seemed like you were kind of ahead of your times when it comes to like the whole networking thing and really reaching out to people and really putting deals together. Do you ever like wish or, you know, wonder like, you know, if you grew up in a different generation like today, obviously there's a lot more mediums in which you would have probably, you know, been able to really shine a lot more, you know, with social media and all that? Or are you, you know, kind of happy with the era that you grew up in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was a late bloomer in a lot of stuff, not just in coming into racing late. And so that's really would be, I guess, almost a senseless thought process to go through. You know, I mean, somebody asked me a similar, in a different way, but a similar. And I said, yeah, you know, if I was 18 years old and in today's world and had the same passion, look out, because, you know, I can tell you I would have accomplished a hell of a lot more than I accomplished, you know, at my age and with my knowledge and with the resources that I had. But the resources that are existing today, you know, I'd be like, yeah, I'd be kicking butt. But, you know, that's talk.
And I was just talking to Scott about this other day, and you were talking about like Haley Deegan. The big thing that seems now that female race car drivers are doing, and I'm thinking like Haley Deegan, Natalie Decker, Tony Brittinger, they all have YouTube channels. And that seems to really be like the big medium that a lot of people or a lot of female racers are using to, you know, help them get notoriety.
Yeah, racing is using it a lot too. I mean, not just the.
No, for sure.
I mean, I think YouTube has become, I mean, it was Facebook and then it was Twitter and then it was, you know, Instagram, and now it's already gone over to the YouTube world. So, I mean, you know, digital technology is opening up a lot of, I mean, now we're getting into the esports and, you know, I mean, and there's a lot of women competing in esports. I mean, there's a high percentage of them that are doing that. So, I mean, the world is changing right now. The sport is changing for sure. I think women are going to be a bigger player in the arena. And I mean, it's happening, but I see it happening. It's going to be happening more and more. But we still have, I mean, that's partly what I'm going to be talking about in Nashville and in some of the future programs about, you know, there's a new word that I became aware of just earlier this month when I observed a program with the FIA. They put on their conference, and this expert consultant said that it takes men to find until we have men, we will not have equality for women, and it's called allyship. So we really need the men in this world, because men are still the majority. They are the in crowd and the majority of the decision makers. And we aren't going to have equality for women until men become our allies and we work together. And so that it isn't just, you don't do anything just because it's a female. It's just that you believe that if the female has got the talent and the ability, they deserve the opportunity.
Merit-based. I mean, more, yeah.
It's not, you know, check a box and, with all the other stuff. So, and I used to call it alignment. Try to always look for alignment. I mean, sometimes it just talking to prospective sponsors, I'd find out if they had daughters, or if some story that they may have had that their wife or their mother played sports or was, denied something along the way, then you'd know that there was an alignment in the way of thinking, a philosophy. Well, now in the new business buzzworld, it's called allyship, and you find, it's not mentorship, it's allyship. It's like, hey, I'm your ally, let's figure this out. And
Right.
yeah, and so, and then it's men and women working together for equality, for not just gender, but race and ethnic and all of the issues, we're experiencing it now socially everywhere. So racing is now also racing is part of our community. I mean, it's our community within the bigger community. So, so anyway, that's kind of my mission, is to be able to push along or pull along, depending on who I'm talking to, that, they get on board.
Right. So closing out these podcasts, Scott has a question that he always likes to ask.
Yeah. So what I always like to ask, it's always so funny because during the show, I always kind of get a feel for what the answer is going to be. And a lot of times it's not what I think it's going to be. I always ask, along the way, is there someone that you would like to point out that was like your champion or hero, or the person you looked up to, or the person that helped you? And it could possibly be someone that no one's ever heard of. Is there someone that you would just like to acknowledge or talk about?
Well, I mean, it has to be Dick Simon.
Right.
Without a Dick Simon, there would not have been a Lyn St. James at the Indianapolis 500. And without Lyn St. James at the Indianapolis 500, you wouldn't want to be talking to me. I would have been a female driver that had a great decade of, racing sports cars and went to Le Mans and did Daytona. I mean, a lot of that stuff was really good stuff. But to be honest, most people don't even know about that. They only know about the Indy stuff. And the people that are racers and understand racing bigger than just the Indy 500, they do know that I've done that other stuff. But without Dick Simon, that brought a whole new level for me in racing, and I will be forever, ever grateful to that man. It just is. I've had others that have helped me along the way and have been those voices, have been that, I call them that, they're that voice in the room when you're not there, or they're the voice in my head that has overcome my voice. There have been times when I was going to be really stupid and somebody came in and brought me some good advice to override my stupidity. I've had a number of those kinds of folks, but really Dick he's the guy, he's the man.
And I realize this question has nothing.
Aaron, wait, Scott. Did you expect that?
Yeah, I did expect that. Yeah, I saw that one coming.
Yeah, you saw that one coming.
That was a fastball right down the center of the plate.
Yeah.
But I don't think that those people can be talked about enough. And I always go back to whether it's Dick Simon or the guy who runs the local kart shop when you needed a chain or some, like that. Everybody's got a champion somehow or another in their career. Yeah. And for some people, it's their mom and dad. And for other people, it's not. And so I always like to hear that answer. I love to get a feel for that. This actually is not a great follow-up to that because it's totally different. Obviously, Janet Guthrie is the first one to run the Speedway, or at least make the race. And what kind of relationship did you and Janet have, or do you have a relationship?
Well, we've actually met the first time we co-drove together at Sebring, and that was 78. So she'd already done Indy.
Right.
He was an Indy driver, and I was this little local girl. So I was kind of, discarded a little, whatever. I kind of deal with you.
Your other co-driver was a female as well, right? And Bonnie.
Yeah, Bonnie Henn, who was the daughter of the guy that owned the car, Preston Henn. And he had this vision of having Bonnie, and I guess she ran a couple of other races. He wanted to, his daughter to have this wonderful opportunity and experience. And I turned the fastest lap in that Ferrari that, during the race, but that's left to be said. But anyway, and then I got to know her, though, through the Women's Sports Foundation, because she was inducted into their International Motorsports Women's Sports Hall of Fame. And I used to just go every year. And then I got on the board and ended up becoming president. So that's how we got to know each other. And I remember when I started Lyn St. James Racing, it always bothered me that Janet never came back. Almost all the veterans there's many of them that would always come back every year. And I'm like, why does Janet not come back? Because the fans would come up and ask me, where's Janet? I'm like, I don't know, So I would ask her that when I would see her in New York at the Women's Sports Foundation dinner. And I found out she would come back for the old timers, but she would never come to the track. I said, Janet, you should come to the track. These fans want to see you, and they want your autograph, and they want to talk to you. Oh, they don't care about blah, 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 blah. And I said, no, you're wrong. So I invited her to come to the track one year when I had the Lyn St. James Racing. And the fans were all over the place. I mean, she has a huge fan following.
Sure.
Oh,
yeah.
Sure.
But she and I are completely different people, I mean, I'm a people person. I'm a high energy, and Janet's quiet, reserved, and smarter than a whip. I mean, she's a physicist or something. And
yeah, she's extremely smart. Yeah.
She's in a whole other stratosphere of where how her brain works. And so we don't have a problem with each other. It's just we're two different.
Sure.
We are just completely different kinds of people.
Well, for so long, you two were in a very small club. It's still not a huge club, but you guys were the only two members, and I just didn't know what kind of relationship maybe you guys had back there or not. Yeah, she seems to be a very. I went and saw her documentary, Qualified. I went and saw the premiere they had it at the Indiana Arts Museum.
Right.
I went and saw that, and then Rutherford was actually there talking, and so was Tom Bigelow. But it was just interesting to see that and kind of see more about her, because like you had said, she was kind of out of, just in the shadows, and it was really interesting kind of see more about her and her life and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, she kind of got plucked out of, Rolla Volstead just sort of plucked her
Right.
out of. And so, anyway, I am probably most happy the fact that there have been 9 women that have raced at the Indy 500. I mean, when because I'm involved in all levels of the sport,
Right.
And so, NASCAR struggled Janet, actually, I had no idea Janet did as much of the soccer, NASCAR racing than she did in the 70s. I had no idea. So that was a good lesson to learn, but they've kind of struggled to have that sort of, marquee and Danica went over and certainly carried that ball for quite a while, but they've still somewhat struggled compared to Indy numbers they've had. So, I'm not taking any credit for it at all, but I am just very happy. I mean, I celebrate the fact that, so many have had success there, and I hope to see that continue and more.
Well, yeah, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, or actually mentioned it in an interview I watched, how the city of Indianapolis really starts to accept drivers, and if the people just fall in love with whomever they can identify with, or for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And
very unique city.
And around the 500, and I think that's always been a good thing. It's always interesting, because Sarah Fisher was so popular. Simona is very popular. You're very popular. Janet, despite maybe what the struggles and kind of whatever she took at first, extremely popular. So I think that's for me personally, I think it's very interesting where some people may think on the biggest stage you're going to get a lot pushback, but actually I feel like there's a lot of acceptance. Would that be kind of your experience with that, or?
Because I remember watching Janet on TV, you know, when she
Right.
ran the 500, and I was just racing that was my Cosworth Vega. And then, you know, and then I think I just gotten into my husband's Corvette a few times. So, I mean, I was kind of like, you know, this local wanker, you know, I mean, not wanker,
Right.
but local runner. And I watched her and I'm like, God, you know, on TV. And I was like, she doesn't look like she's having any fun. And it didn't look like they wanted her there. I mean, the media focused more on the controversy and the negativity. And I was having a blast. I mean, I was welcomed by my it was like a club, you know, I mean, I was a member, we all showed up and we raced. And so I never felt that. And so, so that never gave me any motivation to go, I want to do that, you know, because I'm like, I'm having a time. So I think, you know, she did have a lot of negative experience, but I think that, you know, times changed over, let's just say the 80s. People started to grow up, or people, you know, started to really respect what she had done, even though she was no longer there doing it. And so by the time when she did come back, I think that she had more of a fan base than she realized, because while she was actually doing it, I don't think that fan base was as strong.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that. Aaron, I know you're not going to let her get away without asking her about Le Mans and Indianapolis.
Oh, the question we asked David about the
yeah. Like, so, well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if this is the one I'm thinking of, but are you talking about kind of the pageantry involved and everything?
The pageantry and what it's like to run both, and the differences.
Right.
And that sort of thing.
So yeah, so we had David Hobbs on a couple of weeks ago. One question I asked him, because he was the first driver we interviewed the race in both Le Mans and the Indy 500. He was the first one we interviewed who did both of those. Obviously, those are both very prestigious races. How did you really view kind of the pageantry involved with it, or the, you know, kind of the fan base? Do you think one was kind of bigger than the other once you're over there, or do you think they're just totally different to where you can't really compare them?
They're totally different. I mean, I did Le Mans first, so right. I understood, you know, that was and you're right. I mean, the pageantry there, I mean, it was like, you know, the tech actually takes place in town, you know, so you have to go to town. And I'm like, well, that's tech. I don't have anything to do with tech. Well, no, you got to go. So you go to town, and then you have all these photographs, and you have all these fans that are there. And I mean, the pageantry starts there, and, you know, and then of course the day of the race, I mean, they have this parade, and the drivers are on the backs of these cars, and I mean, they have flowers, wreaths of flowers, and, you know, I mean, it's a really big deal. And it's funny because I had Hawaiian Tropic was one of the sponsors on the car that I was racing. And so I had Gordon Spice and Ray Bellum on either side of me riding in the back of this convertible. And then we were being escorted by the Hawaiian Tropic girls in their little crocheted bikini. And of course the guys are like, you know, and then they're looking at me like, oh, you know, like they got caught or something, you know. I said, hey guys, that doesn't bother me. I said, you wait, you come to Daytona, and I'm going to have Paul Newman and Tom Cruise escort us down, you know. But I mean, the pageantry there was remarkable, you know. I mean, and it really did elevate what it was, the experience of racing in a big race. I mean, a really big race. I thought Daytona was really big, and I thought Sebring was really big. And now you're like, whoa, this takes it to a whole new level. And then when I went back to Le Mans, before I did Indy, I went back to Le Mans in 91, and it was not a good event, but I mean, not a good race or anything, but the actual partying that goes on, and how they have a whole carnival they set up, you know. And so, I mean, it not only is it pageantry for the drivers and the way things are run, but then the fans, I mean, besides them being there all night and, you know, seeing a 24-hour race, which is the same at Daytona, then they had this huge carnival. I mean, it's a really big deal that's going on in the infield. So it is a big deal. Indy in 91, I went to Indy in 91. I went and I rented an apartment in Indianapolis for the whole month of May. And I wanted to see because I'd only gone to the race, or I'd gone to a qualifying day, prior to that. And that's when I understood how the community embraces that race in that month. And I got to observe it without being a part of it, and so I'm so glad I did that, because it helped prepare me. I didn't, at that time, May of 1991, I did not have a sponsor, but I was desperate, thinking I still was going to get. I didn't get JCPenney until March of 92, 2 months before that's when that all came together. But I went and I saw, I wanted to take the whole thing in, and I did, and I'm so glad I did, because in 92, the month of May, I mean, it was nonstop, and it was, and then the day of the race, it just elevates it. I mean, at the parade, the one thing I didn't do in 91 was go to the parade. And when they told me you had to go to the parade, I'm like, I don't want to be at a parade, And the parade was like, it was huge. And it was an amazing, I cried at the end of it, just from the emotion that the fans were giving all of us, but, myself included. And so that's what I'm so glad that I really grasped and learned to understand how and I realized that people in Indianapolis are not all race fans, but they are all Indianapolis 500 fans.
Right.
Absolutely.
There's a difference, and I think that's the level that the sport has had to learn to kind of, how do we grow this? Because there's nowhere else that it's like it is in the town of Indianapolis.
Right. I think one thing that kind of, sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, absolutely. Go ahead.
I think one thing that kind of sets Indy 500 from other, forms of racing is just how passionate the fans are. And you just don't really see that in any other forms of motorsports. And one example I'll use is, obviously if you go to the track, Lyn, or you go to a race, more than likely you're going to have a fan come up to you and want you to sign something. I would guess at least 95% of the time, that item they're having you sign is something related to IndyCar racing or Indy 500, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
And you just don't see that. I'm not saying that sports car fans aren't passionate, but as an example, you just don't see that like you do with Indy 500. It's really got kind of like, I guess, for lack of a better term, a kind of a cult following where people, I mean, they eat, breathe, and they do everything Indy 500. And I'm, as you see behind me, I'm kind of on that same boat.
You're one of them, huh? Yeah. No,
that's I was just going to say, you kind of alluded to it a moment ago. I think that when IndyCar tries to market IndyCar racing, they almost got to not look at Indy and got to figure out a whole different way, because it's such its own thing. It's its own beast, And if you try to you can't replicate it. You cannot do it. It just is not going to happen.
Yeah. No, it is very unique, and I mean, I don't know whether like LA had the Olympics, Atlanta had the Olympics. I mean, they a certain city will, and then of course I've raced at the Detroit Grand Prix, I raced at the Long Beach Grand Prix, I raced at the Miami Grand Prix, I've raced at the Dallas Grand Prix. I mean, the Las Vegas. I mean, so I've been in other where they have the races like that, and Long Beach is the only one that's really survived. Yep. But they don't have any of that type of following, at all. I mean, and so, I mean, they have the big convention center there, which really helps, but a lot of people that even come to that, it's because it's something happening, but they aren't really race fans or even IndyCar fans or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, it is a unique animal unto itself, but it's very special. I mean,
sure.
Another thing that I truly learned is that it's genuine. I mean, the people there genuinely there. I said the people in Indianapolis show up. Other people write checks, that for their community or they're givers in other ways. But the people of Indianapolis, they show up. They give of themselves. I've seen that in that city more than I've been in any other city I've ever. And I've competed in a lot of different events around the world.
I went to they had a Ferrari race over the weekend over there, and I just went in to watch for a little bit. And and I think I heard you say it, and Paul Page said it. Everybody we've talked to said it. Man, you roll under that tunnel, and the world's just a little different. There's something in the air. There is something in the air at the Speedway, and you can't put your finger on it. And maybe it's not there if you've not been to a 500, but I can tell you that I have a good friend at work who just started going to the race with me for the last few years, like 3 years. And he took his family over there to the museum the other day, and they absolutely loved it. And they're from Hawaii, and they're not, racing is not a big thing to them. And there's just something about that place.
Yeah. Something that has this, and this is going to be a challenge going forward as well, because it's steeped in the history. And I love Doug Bowles, and I think he is the caretaker of that history,
Sure.
But, it's so important that going forward always exists, that the caretakers understand the history and preserve the history. And I know Roger Penske will, thank God. And the museum you mentioned, and I know they want to do an expansion and everything, which, it needs to probably have some, upgrades or changes or whatever. But, there's still something about the history that is in the bones. It's in the bones of that place. And even if you don't know the history, you feel it, but it has to be protected too,
Yeah, we were perilously close to finding out what that may have been like, a lot closer than I think any of us truly realized. Sadly, and we can talk about fate or whatever. Well, that sale happened just in time, because
who could have ever,
I think,
that portrayed that picture then of how the
right.
pandemic and all that. And it could have just,
there is only one guy I know, maybe Rick Hendrick would be the other, that one person I know of in auto racing that could have pulled off doing, keeping that going, growing it, keep his plans going. And that Roger's the only guy I know.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. But Lyn, I just can't say thank you enough for coming on here. I appreciate it. I love talking to you. Hope.
Late. I apologize.
I'm sorry.
I apologize.
No, you're fine.
Don't worry about it.
Was there anything you wanted to promote or say before we let you go?
I think the only thing is a lot of the questions you asked are stories that are in my book, and okay. I still got the book out. I got them in my garage and I ship them out. So, if they would go to my website and order a book, they could get it on Amazon, but please don't just get it from me.
Sure.
And then I think that's it. We have those seminars coming up, but those are really specific to women. And actually the one in Pebble is not about racing at all. It's about women who just love their cars and car collectors and all that. I've kind of got my finger in other spaces, but you guys are a racing show. And I think, I'm just looking forward to being back at a race. I'm starting to really miss it.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put a link in the podcast and the video to your website if anyone wants to buy a book.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. And we'd love to have you back sometime in the future. If there's anything you want to talk about, anything in the sport going on you want to discuss, we'd love to have you on.
Well, thanks. So I know I think I put a pressure on you. I didn't want to talk for very long, and here I babbled this whole time, but I think I felt guilty. But anyway, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lyn.
All right. You guys are good. All right. Thanks.
Take care. Bye.